Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Fired Up and Plugged In podcast powered by Emergency Reporting. This is the podcast for all 21st century fire and EMS personnel. I'm Tom Lewis, Enterprise Training Manager and the podcast producer. Joining our distinguished host, Randy Bruegman, is Brian Goss, Fire Chief for the Brentwood, Tennessee Fire and Rescue Department. He'll be sharing his passion for excellence, both from an accreditation perspective and how it's an essential part of any thriving fire and medical organization. Chief Goss is a 38-year fire service veteran, having joined the profession in Bangor, Michigan as a paid on-call firefighter in 1983. In 1988, he began a 20-year career with the Grand Rapids, Michigan Fire Department, where he subsequently moved through the ranks of lieutenant, captain, and battalion chief before leaving in 2008 to accept the position of assistant fire chief of the Brentwood Fire and Rescue Department in Tennessee. He was then promoted to fire chief on July 1, 2011. Chief Goss holds a bachelor's degree in science from Spring Arbor University and is a graduate of the University of North Carolina's Fire and Rescue Management Institute, as well as the University of Tennessee's Public Administrator program. Chief Goss earned his Chief Fire Officer designation from the Center for Public Safety Excellence's Commission on Professional Credentialing in 2010, and he currently serves as a CPC peer reviewer. Welcome, Chief Goss. Chief Bruegman, it's all yours, sir.
Good day, everyone, and welcome back to another session of Fired Up and Plugged In. And today it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Goss, who is the Fire Chief with Brentwood, Tennessee. Welcome, Brian. Appreciate you being here.
It's good to be here, Randy, and always good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, good to see you too. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit today about what you've done with the city of Brentwood when in relation to accreditation and professional credentialing of your staff. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about Brentwood? I've been there a couple of times in the Nashville area, just a beautiful area. But tell us a little bit about the city and the department.
It is a beautiful area. We cover 42 square miles. We're a little bit unique in that we are over 90% high-end residential. Mm-hmm. No manufacturing, no very little commercial other than retail and office space. We are a southern suburb of Nashville. Our northern border shares their southern border, and then we are kind of tucked between them and Franklin, city of Franklin to the south. Our department, we have currently 63 line personnel and 6 administration, 4 stations scattered throughout, and we are actually in the process of building our 5th through a need identified again through the accreditation program. Yeah. We're, as is the whole Metro Nashville area, we're rapidly growing. When I came here in 2008 as assistant chief, we had a population of around 35,000, and today we're just under 50,000. Yeah. So we're unique, and we are kind of the bedroom community to the country music industry, to professional athletes, pay for the Titans, the Predators. So we have large residences. We have complete subdivisions with houses 15,000 square feet and higher. So yeah, wow. We try to treat some of our our buildings and our subdivisions, our residential structures as commercial in the way we respond.
Now, do you have any type of a sprinkler ordinance or regulation in the city and or the state?
We do. We do not have a citywide sprinkler ordinance, but we do have several identified risk areas, hillside protection districts, certain areas from hydrants, certain lengths of driveways that we require them. But it is not a citywide ordinance. It's specified based on your location.
Okay. Well, we've talked several times before since we've known each other for quite a while, but you have some unique visitors every once in a while in your firehouse.
We do.
Talent that resides there.
Yes, one of the first, in fact, the first fire I responded to in Brentwood was George Jones' former residence. Mm-hmm. He was a friend of our department, actually would participate in our chili cook-off and cook his chili right up in our kitchen. I've had the opportunity to meet Trace Atkins and Brad Paisley and several who live or are associated with our community. So it's you never know who you're going to look out the window and see.
That's kind of fun, isn't it?
It can be. It's a little unnerving at first with a guy coming from a small town in southern Michigan, but after a while you kind of get used to it, and that's why I love it here. I mean, it's a different environment than it is in Hollywood, so we just live and let live, and they enjoy that here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, great. I appreciate you, sharing that with us. It's just such a beautiful area down there. So we
I am
always love coming
blessed.
down. Yeah. So as a fire chief, you've used the CFAI accreditation process and CPC's professional credentialing to kind of really lay the foundation for your organizational future. So I just wanted to explore a little bit of that with you today and share how you kind of went down that road and what it's meant for your organization.
Well, coming in from the outside, I obviously had a lot to learn here. I came in an assistant chief position, and it was a brand newly created position as part of their succession planning because the fire chief knew that he was retiring in a few years. So I was an accreditation manager in my former department, and when I got here, I was basically given a desk, a computer, a very general job description, and lots of autonomy. And so as I sat there one day, I realized I needed to learn more about the department and assess where we were operationally. So basically, I pulled out the FESM and I just started leafing through it. And first thing I identified were some shortcomings in the operational guidelines. So I probably spent my first 6 months writing and rewriting operational guidelines. And then during that time period, I also did station visits, every station on every shift, and identify, when you get hired into an organization, you hear constantly what they expect of you, your bosses, the city manager, that kind of thing. What I needed to identify was what the crews on the street expected of me. So we had meetings, which I called fire department impact meetings, and we sat down with them and took a list, got a list of things that were important to them. And what I found out is we had a lot of young, energetic, and motivated folks that were ready to build something great. And they were already a very good department, but coming from the accreditation world, I kind of shared that with them, and the excitement grew from there. I identified a couple of our rock stars, made them the accreditation manager and assistant accreditation manager, and off we went. And that started our journey down the accreditation path, and we kind of restructured and rebuilt from that first year I was here. Most bought in. It's now part of our organizational culture. It's the expectation when we hire people in here. I'm not going to lie. I still struggle with buy-in from some, and struggled despite our greatest efforts to achieve complete understanding of all the people in our organization of what exactly accreditation is. I still hear once in a while, we're just doing that for accreditation. And the way I try to break it down for them, I said, you got to think of, take a woodworker who's building a piece of furniture. I said, the beautiful piece of furniture is the end product. We have the raw materials now, and accreditation is nothing more than the tape measure. It measures every step and every process along the way. I said, in the end, we're going to get a table either way. What it looks like and how accurate and how well it's done depends on the specificity of those measurements. So we're getting the message across. It's been institutionalized. They understand it, and it's been a fairly easy road for me.
So when you bring somebody new into the organization, new recruits, how do you begin to institutionalize just the whole thought process of not only accreditation but credentialing for them?
We put it everywhere. I get a lot of harassment from my people for being the sticker guy. We put stickers on our engines. I'm a big fan of advertising your accomplishments.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many recruits I interview that say, yeah, I looked at your website and I thought that you were an accredited agency. What exactly does that mean? And that opens the door from the very first time I meet these folks to talk about our organizational culture and what our expectations are, both from an organizational development standpoint and a personal development standpoint. Once we started working on accreditation, one of the things that I identified during those station visits that we talked about was there was a strong desire for some type of career pipeline. They wanted a plan. They wanted a roadmap. It was a little arbitrary when I came in, as was the promotional process. So being familiar with credentialing, the first thing I did, and a big believer in leading by example, is my deputy chief and I both applied for and received our CFO. That was in 2010. In fact, we both went to the board at the same meeting. We got that and then continued to work on the process and kind of documentation. And then in 2012, I stood before all of my company officers at an officers meeting and laid an application in front of every one of them. I knew at that time not everyone would qualify. That wasn't the expectation. The expectation is fill out the technical competencies, identify your areas of weakness, and when you decide to go to FDIC, when you go to FRI, look at those instructional tracks that help fill those voids that you've identified.
Mm-hmm.
So that became our career pipeline. And that's been the expectation. Since that time, when I promote, I give somebody 3 full years, because I know, especially through COVID, getting those educational opportunities was a little bit challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But in 3 years, I'm expected to have an application on my desk. Not that it's going to be ready to submit, but it's kind of a checkpoint to see where they are.
Yeah.
Now we have 19 total officers from lieutenant up through my office. 15 of those 19 are credentialed. 5 of those are dual designees. And we have, now that we've built it into our professional development model, we have engineers looking to promote eventually who are filling out the application. We've actually had 2 engineers designated as FOs.
So there are, it's kind of becoming ingrained in their own process. You're not having to push as much as you had to previously.
Right.
So it sounds like that they bought into that whole concept. Did you put that as part of the job description then?
We didn't. What we're doing right now, it's funny, we just this past week, we completed our 5-year community-driven strategic planning process for 20 through 25. And one of the areas identified, one of the goals that we have from a administrative standpoint, is to further refine and define those goals and tie them into training opportunities and those kind of things. So I initially ran the promotional process when I came here, and I've since turned that completely over to my battalion chiefs and all our designees, and they understand the value in that process. So they have developed actually the system so that the applicants have to submit a packet when they're preparing to promote, and you'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how closely that packet looks like the FO application, and measures those same things, the 4 key pillars of experience and training and professional development. Mm-hmm. And so it's been institutionalized, and we're just continuing, even though it's been here for a long time, we're continuing to refine and define.
So you're about 10 years into not only the accreditation process for the organization, but your credentialing process as well. So, as you look back over that 10 years, what's been the organizational development as a whole by using those 2 systems?
I think, and when I speak about this elsewhere too, I'm also the chairman of our credentialing and accreditation consortium, and I purposely named it that because when you look at accreditation, it can be an elephant, and taking even one bite at a time can be very intimidating, but everybody understands the need to develop professionally. So we try to get people involved outside, and I've done the same thing within my own organization. Get them involved in the professional development aspect of it. Get them involved in credentialing. Once they're familiar with the CPSC and the processes, it makes accreditation look a whole lot less daunting. So the way I sell accreditation to folks that aren't familiar, I said, what professional development is. We've talked a lot about credentialing. You're credentialing your organization instead of your individual officers. Mm-hmm. That makes that concept a lot more understandable. And the way it ties in, and the way I've tied it in here, is that invest in your people, develop the best possible officers and upcoming officers that you can, and the organization will be better for that. And then you go into the accreditation program. It's a seamless transition, and say, okay, we've done this for our folks. Now let's do it for our operational procedures citywide. And it's really dovetails into one another nicely, and they're virtually inseparable now.
Yeah. So what? How did you get? Did you have pushback from labor, or how did you get them to buy in on going down this path?
Well, here in Brentwood, we don't have organized labor. We're a right-to-work state. Brentwood does not even have a firefighters association. So I didn't have to navigate that here. But where I come from in Michigan, not far from Detroit, obviously, we were a very strong union organization. And I think, and they've been since accredited. Grand Rapids, Michigan is where I come from. They've been since accredited. And I think the key there is to involve union leadership very early on in the process, from the very foundational discussions that you're having, so they understand it. A lot of the fear and skepticism comes from lack of understanding. So if you explain to them up front, what we're trying to achieve, and take the mystery out of it, it's a lot easier to achieve buy-in. And in my experience, labor unions favor processes, whether it's promotional or whatever improvement process it happens to be, that are consistent, transparent, and fair. and they don't want individuality when it comes to selecting candidates or when it comes to that kind of thing. So this process lends itself to that. And if they view it as credible, if it's applied consistently, and if it doesn't necessarily favor one person over the other, that's pretty hard to argue with. Yeah.
So many chiefs will, we've heard this discussion many times at the CPSC conference that, a lot of chiefs are looking at accreditation or credentialing, and they say, well, we just don't know if we can afford to do that, or, that's just, we've heard it's like, 10,000 hours of time, so we just don't want to do that. We just don't have the staff to do that. So you're a smaller organization, very well run. And so what would you share with them?
The short answer to that is these are things that you should be measuring anyway. Mm-hmm. This is what you should be doing anyway. This is just a structured, credible, time-proven process to do that. There are costs involved, but a businessman friend of mine once made this statement, and I wrote it down just like I have some of your great statements, Chief Bruegman. He said, cost is only an issue in the absence of value. So what you need to do is describe and really promote the value of the process to your leadership. You have to look toward the end game and make sure that the city leadership, county leadership, district leadership, whatever type of organization that you're in, shares that common vision. Like I said before, professional people operating within proven credible organizations provide better customer service, and it actually reduces risk, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. And that's been proven. Our human resources, the people that we have working for us, are our biggest investment. And if we don't invest in them, then the trucks, the facilities, operational guidelines, none of that matters. So our upfront cost for accreditation was a little bit higher because we used the TAP program for both our strategic plan and for our SOC the first time around. But we became students of that process, and now we use those same processes, but we self-conduct. Mm-hmm. And so it has been, I'm blessed, and I know some departments would have a little more difficulty in doing this, but because our city management has completely bought in to the whole idea of the need to be a professional organization with professionals running it and operating within it, it was a little easier sell for me. In fact, we promote our credentialing. We cover the cost of the applications and the renewals even. It's just built into our training budget because that's the value we place on it. So we've had to cut in other areas, but when it comes down to it, our focus is providing the best possible customer service, and that's where we choose to focus our dollars.
Yeah, no, good point. Now, when you brought in the city manager and the city management team, what's been the perspective? And I've had some conversation with your city manager, and he's extremely bright and very, very, he's really good. But what's been the perspective of not only the city manager on this process, but also the other department heads? How do they look upon the organization?
Well, you're certainly right. Our city manager is brilliant, and I promise I'd say that. I'm probably he's not sitting next to me, and he may or may not see this, but he is. I swear the guy knows something about everything and forgets nothing. From a department head perspective, that's a blessing and a curse, to be honest with you, because he was our assistant. He's been in the city for decades, different roles, but he was our assistant city manager before. So anytime I wanted to pitch something to the city manager, Kirk, our current city manager, was my sounding board. How should I present this? How should I approach this? What do you think? Well, now that he's a city manager, he knows all the tricks because he taught them to me. So that can be a little tricky. But he understands and appreciates the data-driven approach. When I came to Brentwood and interviewed, I made it no secret that I was a big proponent of this process. Mm-hmm. I was asked, one of the unique questions I was asked when I came here was, what is your view of NFPA 1710? And as you know, you and I served on that committee together. Yeah. For a while, I as your backup. That's a tricky question when you don't know what their philosophy towards 1710 is. So I asked, Mike Burton. He's a good friend of mine as well, one of my former chiefs. And he told me one time, he said, whenever he asked a tricky question, he said, the best thing to do is be honest. Then neither one of you are getting a product that you don't expect. So I've always respected that. So I said, my answer to that question is, while I understand the need for a standard, that I was a proponent for a community-specific risk-based approach to staffing and deployment. And apparently that was the right answer because I'm here, so fortunately. But Brentwood is all about pursuing excellence in every aspect of service we provide. Our police department is a CLIA accredited organization, the longest CLIA accredited organization in Tennessee. They're now a gold standard award winner. And just last year, our city manager was appointed to the commission, to the CLIA commission. So he had already bought into the vision of accreditation and the values of it before I came here. So it was an easy sell for me, and it almost, to be honest with you, became an expectation. But the way it has impacted other departments is he has now seen the value. I mean, everything we do, from the type of apparatus we purchase to the need to build this fifth fire station, has been data driven. And we have approached it that way. And he realizes and understands the value of that. So he has now required that of other department heads. Now, they may not be pursuing an accreditation per se, but the assessment and evaluation process is very much the same. And I see him utilizing that most recently in public works. We just hired a new public works director, and I sat in on that interview process. And he made the point during that interview that we are a very data-driven organization, and that was the expectation of them coming in. So, I'm fortunate to work with the people I'm working with. Some municipalities or organizations, I understand, have a little bit more of an uphill battle. But if you prove your value and you prove the value of the system, I'm convinced it's very difficult to say no to.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, your public works director probably, I think they have an avenue because they have their own accreditation process as well. So hopefully they're pursuing that as well.
Well, he will, now that you've told me that, because he's a fellow Northerner like me. We actually grew up about 2.5 hours apart. He's from the Chicago area, and we give each other a lot of crap back and forth. But you just put another round in the chamber for me, and I appreciate that.
So back to the cost a little bit. What was the total outlay when you started? Because I think chiefs would probably want to know that.
Oh wow, yeah, you're taking me back to 2014 now. I believe for the initial round we budgeted around $10,000 for the strategic planning tap fee. Plus we budgeted, because we wanted as many members as possible to take part in that strategic planning process. At the time, we were about a 54-member department, and I think we had 42 participate. So the participation rate was extremely high, and we compensated them for their days off for attending that. So I would say, in addition, to the annual renewal fee, and that just to get started using the TAP program, we were in the $15,000 to $18,000 range that first year. And then a little bit for the SOC when we had that facilitated. But since then, once you get through that initial investment, the financial investment, and you understand the processes, then it becomes just a matter of conducting all the assessments yourself and using your data team and those kind of folks to continue that process and do your 5-year or your annual compliance report and your renewals.
Yeah, no, I found that same thing to be true. I had the opportunity to lead a couple organizations through accreditation, and that first lift is always the heaviest. Mm-hmm. But once you have done that, if you have due diligence after you get accredited to make sure that you're maintaining your documentation and doing everything along the way and not waiting until a year out to pick everything back up.
I can't imagine doing accreditation over again every 5 years.
No.
Yeah, we update. I mean, our strategic plan, our standard of cover, that's all part of our annual planning process. Yeah. It all plays into our budget priorities. And so if we don't keep that update, right now, I just came down from a meeting upstairs where we were talking about the fire station. And just this week we had a planning commission meeting, and our heat maps went up on the board for our planning commission. So, I mean, this is something you constantly have to stay on top of, or else not only do you get behind in accreditation, but you also lose some of those biggest supporters in your organization because they'll say, I knew this was something we were just going to do. The books were going to go on the shelf and we weren't going to look at it for 5 more years. So that's important to avoid that mindset.
Yeah, and I think it keeps you a forward-looking organization versus an organization that will develop a document, put it on the shelf, check the box, and then not worry about it and go back to the status quo. So I think it's really an important piece of being a leading edge organization.
Yeah, nothing will kill support for accreditation and support for the fire chief, to be honest with you, than treating it like a project to be done every 5 years.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing, evolving process.
Well, and the reality is if you treat it that way, number one, you're going to really struggle to become reaccredited.
Yeah.
And we've seen many chiefs actually lose their positions because of that, because they didn't do their annual updates. And secondly, it's not good for the organization. I mean, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards because, the world's changing around us. So what about the elected officials? What's been their perspective, feedback over the years?
Again, we are a very professionally run city, and I cannot thank and express my gratitude enough for the support that we have from our elected officials. They are calling us out on social media. They call us out during meetings. Just tremendous support. In fact, I kid my city manager. I said, "Hey, we got such a supported city commission." I said, "I think if we ask for this, we'll get it." And he goes, "Well, yeah, you get anything you want." But it's become kind of a running joke. But no, if you demonstrate your value and prove your value and back up everything that you might want to do or you might ask for, I think that support is inevitable. And we are just very fortunate that and within Brentwood, again, I mean, 91% of our population are adult population are high school graduates. Almost 80% have college degrees or more, bachelor's degree or higher. So we're a very educated community. And I think because we serve a community of professionals, professional service is the expectation. So anything that we can do to demonstrate that and to show that we are working toward being as professional as we can be as an organization and as individuals, we have great support for.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's just excellent. And anything that you would like to wrap up with today?
Just something I happened. We were talking a little bit about the value of credentialing, and when I was preparing to address the local fire officer 4 class at our state fire academy recently, I looked up some interesting stats, and the people that we're looking to promote now kind of fall within that what we would call millennials, and I hate putting labels on it, but it's the 23 to 35 to 38 age group. These are the up and comers. These are the ones that are taking the exams. And some things I found interesting was that 91% of millennials in that age group expect to stay at a job 3 years or less. 91%. My wife works in a hospital system, and she said the average career lifespan of brand new nurses out of nursing school in their organization right now is 19 weeks until they move on to a different hospital or a different floor. It's just a tremendously mobile group of individuals. Most corporations, and you can apply it to organizations like ours as well, have report twice the average turnover within their organizations of that age group. So the way they were raised and the way they were developed was to be able to come in and make an impact and make a difference right away, to be coached, to be provided with guidelines and directions. And if you do that, and if you bring them in immediately and start coaching them and working with them and show them that there is advancement potential and those kind of things, if they work hard, it has worked as a great retention tool for us. We have very little turnover in our organization, maybe to the tune, outside of retirements, of only 1 or 2 people per year. And most of those change careers. They don't go to other departments. So what we use is the credentialing process, and by using that as our professional development plan, as well as our promotional assessment, is we're able to bring those people in and get them started on that track very early on, know what the expectation was, engage them, allow them to contribute. And we found that's worked well just to keep those employees, because face it, turnover is expensive.
Oh, it's very expensive.
So we have found that helps engage that group as well, and that's worked well for us.
Yeah, and I think as Gen Z enters the workforce, which they're just starting to do now, there's some predictive analytic that says that they're going to be maybe even more mobile in their careers. So I think it's wise to lay out a really good game plan for them when they come in and try and retain them as much as possible, because fire service is not something that when we recruit that we can recruit off of the shelf. It takes a lot of investment to get them to the point where they can actually serve our citizens. So that's you're right. It's been very, very expensive. Any final thoughts today?
No, sir. I think we pretty well covered it. I appreciate the opportunity.
No, appreciate you being here, and thanks again. And Chief Brian Goss from Brentwood Fire and Rescue in Tennessee. Excellent example of a great leader in the fire and emergency services, and we want to thank him for taking some time with us today. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Randy. I appreciate it very much.